This is MacDowell as I like it, just really cozy, warm, informal, and just a room full of fantastic old and new friends. All right. Where's Brett? Do I have my cue? Can I start? All right. No, never. All right, so I've got a story time for you. And I'm going to set the scene just a little bit. Imagine you are an artist, and let's say you are a writer, and you're working on your first novel. You've had some success. You've won a couple of prizes for your short story collection, and you apply to MacDowell, and you're one of 5,000 applications annually that we receive, but you get in. And that makes you one of 275 artists accepted annually for a fellowship. And you might be coming from Brooklyn or from Chicago or from Birmingham, Alabama. You might be coming from Kampala, Uganda, from Mumbai or Delhi. You might be coming from Harare, Zimbabwe. And because you couldn't afford it, MacDowell paid for your travel to come for an 8-week residency, and they're giving you a stipend so you can take a break from your job as a barista, a receptionist, a teaching assistant. And for your journey to MacDowell, you've downloaded 2 films to pass the time. One is a classic, The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love, and another one, Past Lives, which everyone tells you to watch because an artist residency appears as a key plot point in this film. Tucked into your bag to read on the train or the plane or the automobile is the art section of the New York Times, the cover of which is a rave review for a new opera called The Monkey King. You arrive in a wooded rural retreat, a forest dotted with dozens of historic buildings, and David, the resident director, takes you to your private studio, which is nestled in the woods, with a comfortable desk, a warm bed, and a wood-burning fireplace with a reading chair. On the wall are what is known as tombstones, and these carry the signatures of every artist who has created something in that studio for the last century. And although they are a little faded, you can make out a few. You see James Baldwin's signature, Thornton Wilder, Alice Walker, Louise Cage, Charlie Kaufman, Colson Whitehead, Audre Lorde, Leonard Bernstein, who all once sat in this very room. And because we at MacDowell hold on to our furniture for decades, you're probably sitting at the desk and at the same chair that they sat into. You have a wonderful first day. You write 2,000 words, and in the solitude of your studio, you know something's happening here. The words you write might be total rubbish, but that's okay. This is part of the process, and tomorrow is another day. But now it's 6 p.m. and you're hungry, so you make your way through the woods and through the meadow at dusk to the main hall where 30 other artists, writers, theater makers, playwrights, filmmakers, architects, dancers are seated, and they're gathered over a warming evening meal served family style that the chef prepares for you every night. You're worried because you don't know if you're going to have anything to eat, because you are a gluten-free raw vegan. They're awesome. But Chef Eric knows this, and he's made a special meal just for you, and you'll be well fed for the entire 8 weeks. You sit down at a communal table, and Michael Chabon sits on your left, and Ta-Nehisi Coates sits on your right, and across the table is Janine Tresori, all artists who are currently in residence. And then all of you start talking, and you keep talking long into the night, and it's a conversation that doesn't really end, because now you've joined the MacDowell community of artists, a community that will sustain and support you as you finish your next book, and the book after that, and the film you decide to work on, and the play after that, and then when you become a visual artist in your later years, MacDowell is there for that too. On your way back to the studio after dinner, you call on an artist friend to share how magical your first day was, and your friend just happens to be in New York, and they're walking from the Met Opera to the subway, and at the Met, they saw Porgy and Bess, written by Dorothy and DuBose Hayward at But it's time to sleep. Tomorrow is another day whose solitude you need to make the most of. You take one last look at the inscribed tombstones, going through name by name, and 3 names jump out at you: Oscar Iweos, Celine Song, and Wang Rao. And you see and notice for the first time that Oscar wrote The Mambo Kings, and Celine wrote Past Lives, and Wang Rao wrote The Monkey King. These are masterful works of art which accompanied you on your journey to rural New Hampshire, and you now realize that all of these things were made at MacDowell. My name is Chuanisa Caetano, and I am the 10th Executive Director of MacDowell. And I get to say this because I'm the director. MacDowell is the most prestigious residency in the country, not just the oldest. We have a room full of board members, donors, friends, artists, fellows, and a warm welcome to you all. There's no one else I would rather be with on our capstone evening of the year. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's guests. Salamishah Tillet is the Distinguished Professor of Africana Studies and Creative Writing at Rutgers University, Newark, and a Pulitzer Prize winning contributing critic at large at the New York Times. Salamishah? Ezra Edelman is the director and producer best known for OJ, Made in America, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. He has produced and directed 3 films for HBO, including the Peabody Award-winning Magic and Bird, A Courtship of Rivals. Edelman's storytelling features some of the most iconic figures in sports through projects such as The Luckiest Guy in the World and Cutie and the Boxer, a favorite of mine. The story of a famed painter, Ushio Shinohara, and his wife. Ezra was also the producer of the long-running show Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. Ezra. And Brady Corbet is an award-winning writer, director, and actor whose bold, uncompromising work has firmly established him as one of the most visionary auteurs of his generation. His most decorated feature, The Brutalist, has gone on to become one of the most decorated films of the decade, winning 3 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Adrien Brody, 3 Golden Globe Awards, including the Best Director and Best Motion Picture Drama, and 4 BAFTA Awards, among many, many others. Welcome, Brady.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you two. And Chi, thank you for this generous introduction and invitation to be in conversation with the kind of premier filmmakers of our time. So we're going to cover a lot of different topics tonight. These two have created an exquisite body of work. And also they can talk about lots of different things at once. So we're going to dive right in. But I just want to start at the beginning. And you two have different childhoods, different origin stories. But Brady, you got into filmmaking, I assume, as a result, or maybe always because you were an actor as a child. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the moment when you realized that you wanted to make films. Was that as an actor, or was it something that happened later or before? And then, Ezra, if you could talk a little bit about growing up, we talked about this a bit before, as a movement child, but the ways in which, when did you realize that you wanted to be a filmmaker, and how does that how did your childhood prepare you for the storytelling that you have shared with us in your work?
Prior to Windows 95, the way that the casting sort of functioned nationally was that there were these hubs all over the U.S. And all over North America, because there were a few in Canada as well. I had a single mother. I was an only child, and she moved. My mother moved from Tempe, Arizona, where I was born, to Colorado to be closer to her parents, to have some support when she was working, and it turned out that this town that had a population of 10,000 people that I was living in was one of these hubs for child actors and unknown performers. Joanna Ray, who was the casting director for David Lynch and cast many extraordinary films, did a lot of workshops and stuff in this town, and was casting from, this is one of maybe 5 or 6 places when she was looking for young people. My uncle, who is an architect, was taking care of me while my mother was on a business trip, and took me to an audition for Alfonso Cuarón's Great Expectations, and I didn't get the role, but I ended up screen testing for the role, and suddenly at the age of 7 I had an agent, and my mother was sort of horrified because she had worked in advertising in Chicago in the 1980s, and her only experience of child actors was concerning, to say the least. So it sort of started then, but it started slowly. I had a pretty normal childhood until I was about 12 or 13. The reason my uncle volunteered me for this was because I was a cinephile from a young age. And so I was a little bit ambivalent about performing, and I was not a particularly extroverted kid. But I loved the process, and so it's a little hard to say what came first, but it eventually led to me making my own projects from a pretty young age, and then I slowly started phasing out being in front of a camera around the age of 18, and then finally stopped when I was 21.
It was your first. Did you make films as a child then? So you have a lot of...
I made a lot of short films and video installations and work as a teenager. I was moving around a lot at that time for various reasons. Eventually took on a life of its own.
Ezra, what similar question?
Just like Brady said.
Different answer. Well, you grew up, famously grew up as a child of civil rights activists. And so I'm curious for you, when did you discover film? What did you grow up, surrounded by artists and intellectuals, and filmmaking came naturally, or how did you come to film as a young adult or as a child? Or
Look, I think as a child I did very few things except watch movies and watch sports and play sports. And I think that, being the child of my parents was, if nothing else, I spent a lot of time by myself. They were busy people who were gone a lot. I was the youngest child. So I was, I had a lot of idle time to absorb stories. But I was not something, unlike Brady, like I didn't have any specific ambitions beyond my interests, and my path is much more pure as far as starting, following a love of sports to where I think my upbringing as far as my parents go is sort of understanding that, I have to contribute in some way to the world, and sort of trying to take what was my passion, but figure out a way to apply it in a way that is actually useful. And so I think that was, if you talk to me in my mid-20s or early 20s, it was like, wait, how do I take this thing where I love it, but actually how do I produce work that's meaningful, that transcends sports or athletes? And I sort of figured that out pretty quickly, that there is a way to, sports is such a lens and, onto our society. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make such storytelling worthwhile and important. And then as I was doing that, I just sort of honed my craft to started doing small things to bigger things to bigger things to bigger things. And I had opportunities through sort of the places that I worked and the opportunities that I had to a point where I was eventually doing longer form narratives, and I've just sort of evolved out of that. So very different from Brady.
And you played what sports?
Oh, none well or relevantly.
Okay, but but it obviously shaped your curiosity and your aesthetic. So you don't want to tell us what sports you played and when did you play them?
I was a baseball player, like, pretty religiously as a kid. If you asked me, Brady wanted to be maybe an actor or a filmmaker when he was 10. I wanted to be a professional baseball player.
Okay, so that's helpful.
It didn't work out.
Yeah. Oh, lucky thing we get to reinvent ourselves. So, well, Brady, I want to go back to your early work. So, and I think it's interesting that you kind of came into the industry as a child actor, and your two first films as a director really focus on their coming-of-age narratives. One, The Childhood of a Leader, that's based on the Sartre short story, and then the second film, which is about, if you haven't seen it, starring Natalie Portman, kind of coming of age as a pop star whose first formative, famous experience is being a childhood survivor of a mass shooting, right? So these are two films that you when you decided to make films, these were the topics and the themes that you were going to explore. I'm curious for you, how did you come to those two projects in particular? What were the kind of concerns that you were interested in? And I have a similar question for Ezra too, but why Childhood of a Leader as your first project? Was it something that you were always like, you read the short story and you realized that's something that one day I want to adapt, and if you interact with Brady, he's such a light, and then the films are that one's about the kind of coming of age of someone who's going to be like a Hitler-like leader. So how did you come to that topic?
Yeah, personally, in my personal life, I'm definitely overcompensating. My worldview is at least my immediate family perceives me as being a real pessimist. I was a history buff from a young age, and I had wanted to make a film on the Paris Peace Conference for a period of time for whatever reason. It was an obsession of mine, a moment in American world history that shaped the world as we know it, or reshaped the world as we know it. Certainly reshaped Europe, the Middle East, and the road to hell on Woodrow Wilson's part was very much, paved with good intentions. I don't feel like I belong to anywhere. I've never felt that I belonged to anywhere. I mean, when people ask me where I'm from, it's sort of a difficult question for me to answer because my mother moved around a lot for her work. I then suddenly had a job at a young age, and I was traveling a lot for work. And nationalism is something that is really sort of abstract for me. I just don't identify. And I mean, even for my wife is Norwegian, while I would say that Norway is not particularly bigoted, of course there are bigots, but it's not it's not something that I would say is definitive of the culture at all. They are nationalists, and it's something that I'm very resistant to. I think that it's complicated for me because I'm like, yes, you're the most progressive nation on the planet, but that's very much as a result of the profit from spraying the rest of the world down in black tar and oil. So I think that it's fascinating that everyone drives a Tesla, and when oil bought them that Tesla. These are things that I struggle with. These contradictions are things that wherever I've lived in the world, I see an inherent tension there. I am an American, even though I've lived a lot of my life abroad, and I have a half Norwegian daughter. So I have a very unique perspective about this country, for better, for worse, and it remains the sort of object of my fascination, sort of really revisiting the way that the narrative of this country has been established, and really putting some pressure on it from various perspectives. And the reason I've made films about adolescence is because, for me, America is a country in its adolescence. And so for me, that's what childhood was about, and it was certainly what Vox Lux was about. And the Brutalist was about, an adult that behaves like an adolescent. So.
And so with the first two films anyway, you have children who are villainous at best, right? So, and I was just curious, how did you choose, when you're picking topics, and then again, Ezra, I'll ask you the same thing. Why were those the particular things that you were interested in exploring about childhood or adolescence? I mean, America being an adolescent, in a perpetual state of adolescence, I guess, as the allegory for these films, is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing for me to pinpoint. I wrote The Childhood of a Leader 16 years ago, and I made the film when I was 24 years old, and it stars a 7-year-old boy, and it's very, very loosely based on Jean-Paul Sartre's short story. It's as much based on this on this short story as it is Paris 1919. I was passionate about virtual histories growing up. I love Robert Musil. I love Thomas Mann. I love W.G. Sebald. I love Ingeborg Bachmann. There were I grew up working in a bookstore, which is another story. But for me, the novel, or today even video games, are so much freer than the 3-act structure of most dramatic narratives. So I really struggle with the state of cinema, because in the first 5 or 10 minutes, I sort of I've got their number, and then they continue to just be what they're about, and so I'm interested in pushing those boundaries as far as we can, and also I just because something is independent doesn't mean that it needs to be small. The idea that like a U.S. independent movie is two people having a conversation on a couch is fundamentally uninteresting to me. So I'm interested in projects that have they're not about a character. They're about a moment in time, the epoch. They encompass a lot.
Yeah.
And that's something that I love from novels, and something I love from games, and my wife beats me up a lot for letting our daughter play video games, but I was like, I actually think it's really important for her development, and I really mean that.
Thank you. And that's interesting, because when you look at least the first two films, you have, like, I don't think it's a 3-part structure, but you have these breaks that announce the next scene that kind of play with that as well. Ezra, so in your case, and I think this idea of, one, being really historically focused or grounded, and you were a history major, as you mentioned to me earlier. 2, having films that kind of either stand in or give us a prism to a certain historical period really is also part of your aesthetic and your practice. And I'm thinking, like, at least with the Brooklyn Dodgers, we're starting in 1940, Kurt Flood, we're getting to 1960s. I mean, your films, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, the 1980s, Big East, 1990s, and then OJ being, and we'll get to OJ later, but being, 70s to the 2000s. Your films give us a kind of compelling insight into historical moments through the lens of sports and race. But I'm curious for you, when you think about, how did you pick these topics? How did you pick this? I just listed a lot of works that you did, but how does a project come to you? Are you curious about a particular time period? Are you curious about a particular athlete in these early films of yours?
I mean, again, very different from Brady. I mean, I think I had the fortune of sort of existing in when I was younger within sort of I worked at HBO for a lot of years. And so I was in a space where there were things in the works. Sometimes I could pitch things, but like a lot of these things you're talking about, there was a combination of material that existed that were sort of in the ether that I saw something in and said, oh, I want to do that.
Okay, what's an example of that?
The Dodgers.
Okay.
Like I was sort of interested in the scope of a narrative that includes a team that integrated baseball, but also a story about New York City and city politics and why this team left Brooklyn, and that has to do with sort of everything to do with the airplanes and westward expansion and Robert Moses, and like I basically will like look at stories and sort of see what interests, like sort of, oh, I'd like to spend some time exploring that, and I'd like to sort of, and I am obviously interested in American culture, and so I think each of those stories, I really wanted to. I mean, I think one thing that Brady said, which I agree with. Well, one, I really appreciate the ambition he has in making stories. I really appreciate the fact that he is trying to break the mold in form, because I do think a lot of things are staid and boring. And I think in listening to him, one thing I think we share is an interest in contradictions and hypocrisies. And so if it's something like Curt Flood, for instance, that's a film I desperately wanted to do, partly because, here's a guy who was very unknown, who was a black baseball player, if you don't know him, in his heyday in the 60s as a great all-star player for the St. Louis Cardinals, and he's famous because when he was traded to the Phillies in 1960, at the end of the 1969 season, he refused to go, which led to him suing Major League Baseball in a case that went to the Supreme Court. And while he lost the case, he basically challenged the antitrust exemption that Major League Baseball had, and it led to free agency. And sort of the story of him is that, the story was that he was principled, and he took this stand, and he was a martyr, and his life was ruined, and he became an alcoholic, and basically the players won the right to be free agents, and no one ever gave him any credit, and it's a very sad story. And that's all true. Yeah. Except that, there was a book that came out that I read that was, about sort of the fact that the life he led, he also was someone that had a strain of activism in his life, and when he was refused a house to be bought in Oakland where he sort of took a big stand publicly about housing discrimination. He went to a rally with Dr. King in Alabama in the early 60s. And so you have a guy who clearly believes in doing the right thing. But there was also a guy who sort of was, an alcoholic, a womanizer. He was an artist. There's very much a Renaissance man, an artist on the side. But, sort of it came out that maybe he was also a fraud in his art, or maybe just to sort of sell all the art that he had to do, he was having someone else do that. So I'm like, wait, how does this person who is known as this guy who took this principled stand, also somebody who maybe was ripping people off at the same time? And it also made me think of who are the type of people who do set themselves on fire. Who are the people who just go, oh, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm going to take a stand even though I'm actually at the height of my powers. Well, that's why I've been fascinated by Colin Kaepernick. Love the guy, and I'm like, there's always a deeper thing there that I'm interested in. What is going on with that person at that time that makes him essentially walk out on his career? And it's never, to me, purely the answer, he's very principled. And so for me, he was an example of someone, and no, there's more, there's a there. Now, it's very hard to access this and access the truth when also there's a narrative that wants to be forwarded. And so that was an example of something that I think, where, again, to go back to Brady breaking the form, when, as I've done more things and realized that, maybe every documentary doesn't have to be an hour and a half long. Maybe you can actually spend more time doing this and telling longer stories and actually be able to include the nuances and the complexities of who these people are, the context from which they came and for which they came personally and in terms of our country. And that's sort of the place I've now ended up in terms of trying to figure out who we are as people. Yes, I'm a lot of times interested in African Americans, and sometimes they're athletes, sometimes they're, but also examining who these people are that we absorb every day in our lives and have a certain comfort with, image of, feeling for, and understanding who they actually are and what created them.
It's interesting too, because this idea of you both being really interested in kind of contradictions or paradox, and whether that's because you're artist, because you're American, because you're both, that it's a kind of interesting theme, and then the way in which history reveals those and then also kind of covers up that stuff as well. One of the things that's interesting about Brady's Child of a Leader is the way in which it kind of plays with form, like you're saying, but also documentary. Like, you're not sure what's narrative, what's, it's looking at it visually, you're kind of collapsing all of these genres at the same time. I have a question for you both about what is, and then you can push back on this, like the films that are considered at this stage of your career, your magnus opuses. So OJ and also The Brutalist. And how do you feel like these early works, and maybe this isn't your part, do you feel like you're actively working your way to these big projects through these earlier works, or do you think it's a very distinct, because there's themes that obviously overlap. Is Brutalist for you something that you built this repertoire, you built this kind of aesthetic style, and then this was your moment to like really pull it all together, or did you see it as a distinct project from the earlier works? And then with OJ, it seems to me that you went from producer to director, and you've been working through certain questions through sports, but then OJ kind of opens up the lens to think about other issues that you've been dealing with, but because it's a long form, you were really, so I guess the relationship, how do you think about these big works of yours in relationship to your earlier selves and your earlier films?
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's a body of work. I think that they are all as big as they could have been with the limited resources that were available to me at that time. I mean, The Child of a Leader was a film that was shot in Hungary and France when I was 24 years old, starring a 7-year-old. It was shot on 35 millimeter, and it spans like 30 or 40 years. That was as far as I could possibly carry the ball at 24 years old. Making a movie in America with Fox Lux was an extraordinary challenge, and actually one that for me ultimately wasn't worth it. I mean, the film had an $11 million budget, which was bigger than The Brutalist, and yet it was money so improperly spent that we only had 22 days to shoot the film, and I had $4.5 million to actually execute the movie, and the rest of it were obscene fees that investors and various other interested parties were just sort of leeching from the production. So after I had had that experience, I decided to go back to where I'd made my previous film, and work in a way that made some sense for me, and where we didn't have a $1.5 million transportation budget. So I think that for me the films are, I'm for better or for worse, I'm the same person that is attacking these different subjects. But what's funny about a film is that whether you want it to or not, it ends up looking like your film. It's a very strange thing. Like, I mean, somehow there are myriad decisions that result in something that looks a lot like the previous thing you made, and so it's certainly I didn't set out with an idea of sort of how, what I thought my body of work should look like or sound like, but of course I see overlaps in the Venn diagram. And there's nothing I can do about it. And at a certain point, you just sort of submit to that, and it's sort of about having a healthier, relationship with yourself. You look in the mirror and you don't like everything you see, but you said what you meant. Yeah,
but I think in fancy film theory, it's called being an auteur. So you can release whatever feelings of repetition.
I mean, I'm a dad, I'm a dad that makes movies. I identify as a lot of other things before I identify as a tour, and also I think that narrativizing. I think what's interesting. I mean, just to bring it back to what these contradictions when you're narrativizing someone's life. I mean, that's for all of us. I mean, if somebody asks you where you're from or what you've been through, of course, there are major omissions because you just want to make it as sort of linear for the person that you've met at the bar as possible, because you just want to. It's about being succinct in a way, but my whole life was a zigzag. It has not been, there's been no arc. But I think that's just, we like to make sense of things, and narrativizing our personal histories, and certainly narrativizing someone else's is just human nature.
Thank you. Ezra, your body of work, but also just leading up to OJ.
I mean, okay, you might be able to tell me more than I can, since you masochistically have been watching all this in the last couple of weeks.
I watched all of your stuff.
I mean, like,
I didn't get to watch all of Brady's acting performance, though.
I mean,
so
That's okay.
she's a very prepared moderator. I mean, in actually thinking about it right now, I have an answer. I mean, I think that for me, in a different form, I think what's come is there's progression towards, with each thing I've made, being more confident in control of the investigation into the narrative, and when in terms of interviewing people and the comfort I have with having these conversations and extracting truth and going deeper. And so I think that if you look at the series of things I've done, I think what you'll see is me sort of more intimately, getting more intimate and closer to what the actual story is of these people or of this thing. And so that maybe it has to do with the period of time. Maybe it has to do with, again, the people who are alive. Maybe it has to do with, again, if you're like, oh, I made a film about Magic and Bird, I know I'm going to interview these guys, but like there's a level to which I know I'm not going to penetrate these humans. And so I actually have to find a way in the story that I'm telling you that is true, but basically I have to take in consideration the mythology. And I have to extract truth out of that mythology, but I'm not going to get to really understand the questions about those people that I actually really want to understand. And I don't have the time with them, nor I don't have the power to sit in front of them and ask them those questions.
So how do you get there then?
One thing that helps with the body of work is that it helps if once you've made The Brutalist, or once you've made things that people recognize and they trust in what you're doing and they understand that you're good at what you do, that you're an honest broker, then they start to be more open with you. And when you're sort of starting and sitting and having a conversation, they get longer and they're more comfortable with you and they're more interested in what this exchange is, then you get somewhere. And I think in some ways with OJ, like I was attracted to more the sort of chance of making something from a formal standpoint that was longer, that was something that could take a trip through, 40 to 50 years of American history and actually maybe reframe a narrative that we've sort of been, glitching on and stuck on for 20 years, and explore it with the sort of proper context I felt was, useful. And then you take that, which are a series of many, many conversations where people wanted to, with the benefit of hindsight, really sort of engage what that was about for themselves and for all of us. And then, like, for me, when I went to the next thing after that, it was like, I'm not doing this unless I'm like, I can really excavate the real truth. And so that's where I think I found that I've just been more merciless and going deeper and more confident in my ability to do that and do it in a way that is revelatory and also fair.
Do you start with a question first? When does the question that you're trying to explore come to you in your process? Is it with OJ, for example, and then obviously with other works as well, but I'll use OJ. Do you go in with a set of expectations, you look at the archive, and then a new question appears, or do you have something that's like underneath all of that at the beginning that you want to explore, and that's the thing that kind of sustains you? I
mean, I don't know how Brady feels, but it's always this weird thing of like trying to understand or go back in time to think about what you did or didn't know before you started something, after you've become an expert in the subject, And I think with OJ, I mean, look, I start off kind of similar to how you apparently do panels, and I read everything that is there to read. I like really do my.
When I do interviews.
Or you do, sorry, when you do interviews,
Yeah,
when you do your work.
Yeah, when I do.
And by the way, it's proper, and you can tell. And by the way, and you're sitting here, and like we both say, oh, I feel safer because you've done that work. And I feel the same way. So part of what I would do is learn, watch, read everything I possibly can. You know, cull from all these sources that, by the way, might not exist in the same lane, start to form my own sort of connections or theses. And then, yes, I had some questions. Some questions, though, are things that, like, I already inherently understood. I understood for the execution of that film, I could go, wait, so this thing happened. How did all these people over here see one thing? And how did all these people over here see the other thing? I knew the answer. But like, how do you sort of properly go through the paces of creating a narrative so you can emotionally get in touch with that? That's one thing I was interested in executing. And another thing was, from the beginning, I think I was really, and not to get in the weeds, but I was really interested in the idea that the space and time between 1965, for instance, and 1968, which were incredibly volatile years in our country, and the notion that this one person, essentially in 1965, gets famous for running a football at junior college in San Francisco. And then there's a riot in Watts where a group of people have to sort of like do what they did to get noticed. And then this guy 2 years later shows up literally next door to Watts and going to an all-white private school to run a football, to be treated like a god. And he's still next to these people who now it's like, oh, it's almost like, oh, but he's protected and he's in this space. And they're still in the same situation. And that really created the juxtaposition in terms of who we are, who has access, who has status, and sort of how America really works. And that for me was actually the sort of framing that I wanted to explore going forward.
The Brutalist, does it come to you similar in terms of the story that you wanted to explore? How did that come to you? I guess you and Mona.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's hard to say. It's like a song that gets stuck in your head. You know, I have various disorders that I've recently been diagnosed with.
Name one.
Sexual deviant. But I think that there is there's something that sort of gets stuck in your craw, and it's really obsessive. And I think that, obsessions are a curse, and so the only way that you can exercise them is by sort of doing something about it. I think something that people really struggle with in terms of like being treated for these things is the concern that you will lose that that passion and that drive. Because a lot of my anxiety, of course, is probably the reason I haven't been hit by a bus quite yet. So these are things that can be a tool. And I just, for me, a film is, it's hard for me to speak summarily of. I mean, it's something that lives with me for years before we execute a draft. When we write a script, my wife and I, and we work separately and together, so we're really not dogmatic about that process. We like to work with each other, but we don't need each other, and I think that's always been something that's been very healthy for our relationship. It's hard to say where it came from, but we usually bring each other a pile of research and work and notes, and it's like, okay, well, now I need some help, and organizing all of this, and also my wife she went to a school for the performing arts. She's read all of the classics. She kind of is a classicist in many ways, and I'm really the opposite. But we sort of have what the other one needs. It's a way to organize a lot of my own personal obsessions. So I grew up with an architect. I mean, the Brutalist is, of course, emblematic of that. I spent most of my childhood at Taliesin West. Frank Lloyd Wright School in Arizona, where my uncle was studying, and he lived with us while he was attending there. But also that is also a way of narrativizing it, because I didn't think about that for 20 years or 25 years, but I did realize from our conversations that the job that we did was, there was a lot of overlap. I mean, the frustrations that he had with his clients were very similar to the frustrations that I had with my financiers.
Yeah.
And it's complicated, like who ultimately deserves to win is very, very complex.
Yeah.
Because if you're paying for it, I absolutely understand the notion that you feel entitled to that final authorship. But also, if you were an author, then you'd write a fucking novel.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go to a moment when you both won, maybe is the best way of saying it, and I want to think about time, both in terms of scale and sacrifice. So your film, and you talk about this we'll get to the Golden Globe speech a bit, but The Brutalist is a film that is both like applauded for its epic sweep, and then has been critiqued for it being too, the thing that people say, it's sometimes it's too long. And I was curious for you, how did you realize that film needed to be told? Like what was the battles that you had to fight? Maybe none, but also the integrity to have a film that is epic in form and in execution. If you could just talk a little bit about, did the story just did you always go into it knowing that it was going to be an epic film in that way, or is that something that unfolded over time? And with OJ, I wanted the same question for you about the shift from an hour and a half to 7.5 hours, I think, and then you winning all the awards, and then the rules changing as a result of you winning the awards. So anyway, can we just talk about time in terms of you playing with genre, and also were there battles that you had to fight to maintain the integrity of the film's epic sweep, or was it just you were just?
Yeah, every movie is a conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, every single one. And it's funny because in my personal life, I'm really avoidant. But in my professional life, I run at conflict.
Yeah.
And I run towards it. I just think that it's a strange conversation to have. Like, why is a film 2 hours long or 90 minutes or what? It just doesn't make any sense to me. We have novellas, we have 2,000-page novels. I'm reading Gertrude Stein's The Making of Americans right now, which was recently reprinted. That is like I'm breezing through like this. Like I've read novellas that take me a year to finish. It really depends on the content, and I like extremes. I like things that are extremely personal, intimate, and small, and I like things that are really, really big. It's just a bigger canvas. We knew that it would be a controversy. We didn't know that it would be such a controversy because it was a very inexpensive movie relative to what it was. The film, we went through. Yeah, it was terrible. It was a really tough experience because essentially the financiers rejected delivery of the film, which meant that the piece of paper that we had taken to the bank, we suddenly owed the bank, about $5 or $6 million. And I had this sort of Damocles hanging over my head for the better part of a couple of years. Fighting, to keep the film intact, but I also felt really confident that the film, it deserved to take up as much real estate as we were taking up, and so I just, it was very challenging. But what's great is that whenever you are able to, and it's pretty rare, but when you're able to succeed on your own terms, then it allows for you, moving forward, you become your own comp. So, normally they're like, well, it's this meets this. But then you're like, well, it's just me doing what I've been doing. And if I'll be able to make the next film as a result of that. And we're going to spend all that credit, I mean, it's all I've got is the next project.
Ezra, your thoughts on? Well, with OJ, for example, I mean,
it's just very different. I mean, in the sense that like I was asked to do a thing. I had what ended up being a, while the experience itself of the work was challenging and hard, but it was this great experience where because I was asked to do something that was already in its conception 5 hours long, and I was like, that was sort of invigorating for me. But then I got into it and I made the thing, and like again, in a similar but different way, he's working, trying to tell and then tell the story the way he deems necessary. And then it becomes The Brutalist, and it's 3.5 hours long, and it has an intermission, and it has all these things. And so with this, I'm like, I know it has to be a certain length, but you can't just make something that is 5 hours long. Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know what the material is. I don't know what the story is. So then I started making the movie, and it became, kind of twice that long. And I kept kind of going back to them, and they said, okay. And then finally, essentially, it was almost 8 hours, and I happened to be working at a place that said, oh, we're fine with this. In essence, it's twice as long as what we actually wanted for television. I didn't understand this was something, and even though I really set out, my intention was, I'm gonna make a 5-hour movie, that's great. Became an 8-hour movie. And it didn't occur to me this was something that had access. Let's like, oh, we can submit it to Sundance, and we're going to show it. Oh, it's going to be in theaters. All these things I didn't expect, but it was basically something that I was allowed to tell the story in the way I saw fit, and maybe in a different way. I was met not with opposition, but with open arms, and the people sort of valued the work that I created, and they helped it flourish.
Yeah.
And then I've had the opposite experience.
Yeah. We'll get to that. This is actually part. So, Brady, I have a quote that I read in an interview that you did earlier this year, and you talk about time in terms of sacrifice. So just now we talked about in terms of scale and format, and aesthetic and political vision, and you talk about a film being made over the course of 7 years, and you say by the time I'm done with the promotional campaign, it will have been 8 years. Definitely, years of my life have been eroded from the result of the stress of making the film. Of protecting the flame of the film, even though the film has been so impactful and even commercially viable, which is kind of amazing. Then you go on to say, as I get older, you start saying goodbye to people. People drop dead. And I think you value your time differently, and you have different priorities. When you're talking about growing older in the industry, it's not always terribly sustainable to live like a nomad and taking too much time away from your family. So you both have done projects that have taken time, right? And I'm curious for you, and then so there's something quite beautiful about your reflection on time, and something there's a sense of loss as well, that time not spent with other people. And I was curious with these long form projects and films take a long time, so it's not exclusive to the two of you, but you also have created epic works, and Ezra also with the Book of Prince has spent 5 years of his life working on that film. So can we just talk a little bit about the sacrifice that do you associate making these films, the time it takes as sacrifice, or do you feel like this is kind of a selfless act that you're contributing to the world? Well, Ezra doesn't think selfless. Well, maybe you do, I don't know, but I just wanted to play with, because that was striking to me, that there was a kind of sadness a bit about how much, even though there's the artistic impulse to make these things, there's also a loss that comes with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, it's really painful to make something mediocre as well. If you're going to spend years of your life on a project, it should be worth it. Obviously, that means different things to different people. But also I think that to a certain extent that comes from a place of some resentment, because I also felt like I had many years of my life that were sort of robbed of me, because it didn't need to be that difficult. It really didn't. We would have made the same film 5 years earlier, more or less. And so I was frustrated that the powers that be made it a particularly and unnecessarily arduous experience. But that said, I'm incredibly grateful as well. So I mean, this is my melancholy. I mean, it's both. I mean, it was painful and it was beautiful and like a lifetime is. I'm just grateful that I had an immediate family that stood by me, because I don't think I was always the easiest person to be around.
Ezra, do you have thoughts about? I mean,
What's your question?
My question. Well, no, I mean, Brady's in the got through it moment.
Well, I was going to say, do the ends always justify the means?
Well, I don't know. I mean, actually, that was the thing about the end of the. It was very funny. The end of the movie, the end of the last movie was really polarizing. People really loved it or hated it, and for me, it was a very pessimistic conclusion. It's like, oh, there you are at the end of your life experience. You are voiceless, and you are, you're alone, and you're being celebrated, and people are co-opting your narrative, and I think that's really interesting. But I think that man's spirit is most exhausted at the peak of its achievement. Noon signals the onset of midnight. It's like, I just think that there is this really. I think it's really disturbing to be confronted with your body of work at times, because it's a way of measuring the time by, and I think that it's really overwhelming. And is it worth it? It's really hard to say. I mean, I'm not sure.
You want me to ask you that?
No. I was like, sorry.
So I think everyone's familiar with.
What do I mean? Like, is it worth it? I mean, that's why I was asking, because it's like actually I think I made something for the first time where even if it were something that had come out and people were seeing it, I would say that I don't think it was worth it. Just for the process and how unenjoyable and difficult it was to execute something. Maybe because, he said it's hard to make something mediocre, but seems like there's a lot of things that are mediocre. So I don't know how hard they are, but that's what a lot of shit is. So as a result, I wish I had a muscle that, or some sort of chip in my brain that prevented me from sort of going to a place that prevented that, and knew how to cut his losses. Because I've spent a lot of time thinking, if I can't get my years back.
Yeah.
And and what comes out of it. And I think that listening to Brady, I'm kind of inspired, because I know it's like how long it took him to make The Brutalist. I know how the lack of resources he had, and I know a lot of the things he had to do to make that happen. And frankly, he told me a story last year when I met him, and honestly, my reaction was I don't know that I have that in me to do that. You have to really believe in the thing you're doing.
Yeah, but you do have it in you. I mean, you just.
I used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so no, I question whether and I think while I don't have a family, did make me question sort of what is sacrifice when you sort of go to the mat to try to devote yourself and obsessively make something, and if the process isn't enjoyable and edifying, and then no one sees it in the end, sort of what's the point? And that's sort of a bigger question about art. If you make something, but if the tree falls in the forest, it's and so I don't have any answers.
I have a question for you related to this. So you have this, it was going to be a 9-hour documentary on Prince, an artist who famously was at odds with corporate.
There's a lot of meta aspects to this, yeah.
Yeah, and also kept a lot of music that you had access to that we will never necessarily hear. I was curious, now that you're in this place with a film that you've made that for all intents purposes is probably as brilliant as everything else and probably better. So
That's the one good thing.
Yeah.
You can say that, and like
Yeah, we can.
no one will ever know that it's a piece of
Yeah,
shit.
no one will ever know except for the writer of the New York Times. But I'm curious, what did you? I mean, is there anything about doing a documentary on Prince, an artist that was so embattled that he forgoes his name for a while? Is there anything that you learned from doing this work on him that is helping you in this particular moment?
I mean, no, because I mean, let's just say Prince is such an extreme character.
Okay.
I don't feel a lot of
You
I don't feel a
didn't
lot of
feel
connection to this guy.
Interesting.
And I think part of getting back to the idea of contradictions and like Prince is not the person you think Prince is.
Yeah.
Not that I know who you all think Prince is.
Yeah.
And so like you spend some years with Prince, it's not that fun.
Yeah, I see.
And you spend a lot of time with people who are around Prince, it's even less fun.
Yeah. So by the time that
So you're like, and then you think
Yeah.
about a guy who like died of a drug overdose in a box and within a box that
Yeah.
he built for himself,
Yeah.
and you're like, but he wasn't supposed to have done drugs.
Sorry.
So how did that happen?
Yeah.
And so that's the nature of the sort of narrative, which is a forward-facing person who embodies and represents all these things, like genuinely. You know, he liberated people in terms of who they are, sexually, racially, from a gender standpoint. And yet he was this guy who was really imprisoned by his own trauma and insecurities and lived a really challenged life because he was very afraid to ever reveal himself. And that's a tough character to spend that much time with. So anyway, yeah, I guess I learned that I don't want to be him.
Okay, well that was good. I thought you were gonna be like, and yeah, I learned how to resist the system. And
Is this
Yeah.
the bleakest McDowell conversation?
Yeah.
no, it's good. We're gonna. It's good. It's not the bleakest.
Well,
It's
and,
very
by,
honest.
and by the way, even as you said that, everything that is about like, oh, Prince, like, he stood up to the record label and he said like it was all about artistic freedom. And then when you learn the story of what actually happened, you're like,
Oh man. Okay.
is that what happened? Okay.
Okay, so when we go in your archives, we know that you did challenge authority, though. So we'll go with that with both of you and your lives.
Sure. I think Prince won more often than I won.
Yeah. For now.
Oh.
Oh. I mean, we just turned 50, so we can't be, ending the story already. I want to go with this censorship. So this is the big, one of the reasons why they brought you together.
Bad.
It's bad. So one, yes, in general it's bad, and it's particularly bad at this historical moment. Brady, in your Golden Globe speech, you talked about. I mean, this is a big part of. I watched you, and I was like, oh my God, he must have been at odds with lots of people. But why was it important for you to say that directors should get final cut, should be able to break the tie in terms of final cut edits? That moment.
I know. I mean, listen, for me, it's a self-evident truth. Like, if I
Right.
pick up a novel, I want to read something that was written by one person, not by 25 executives.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not interested in a work of art that's an exquisite corpse. It's the body of a mermaid in the face of a dolphin. I don't give a fuck about this at all. I find it really strange. Like I don't like public art projects for that reason. When it's like, and everyone contributed, and I'm like, it just looks like a fucking mess. And so it's not that it is inherently good. It is that it is inherently consistent, and that continuity of perspective is what we go to the movies for. And I find it frankly disturbing when I'm getting notes from an executive anywhere that has never made anything. They've never been published. They have never been produced, and yet, for some reason, they feel like they can come into my kitchen when I'm in the middle of cooking them dinner and fucking dump a bunch of salt into the soup. It's just like, get out of here. I mean, think about like what Nana would say. Like, it's just like this is it's ridiculous. I'm not interested in McDonald's. It's not what I want. And I think that it's so strange. Whenever I sit down, the second that someone says, I've been courted by a lot of studios, and they're like, well, we have a very collaborative notes process. And I'm like, no, there is no notes process. There is none, and the thing is that I don't need you. I don't require your services. And so it's an interesting thing, because the thing is that whether I've got $10 or $10 million, I'll make the thing. And so I think that it requires some stubbornness and some pigheadedness. And what's interesting is tonight we've inadvertently been talking about the pragmatic reality of actually being an artist, because it's something that there's a lot of mythology around and a lot of narrativizing around. Yeah. And even though it is a slightly bleak discussion, at least it's a frank one. That I think represents the experience of most artists that are, our age.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we grew up in very different places, but we have very similar mindsets.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, I don't know what what do you want me to add? I agree. I co-sign what he just said.
Yeah. No, you don't have to add anything. I mean, we're just talking about censorship.
Again, it's bad.
Yeah, it's bad, and also, I mean, listen, the state of American or just documentary film.
I mean, look, I maybe this is akin to a more classic conversation about narrative film and studios versus independent film, right? And so where for years and years, you have these movies that are made by big studios, which you understand what that means. They're going to have a notes process. It's going to look a certain way. And then sort of an independent film movement, by the way, I'll just say from the late 80s, I'll skip this word. And then you understood where these auteurs came and started making these kind of different movies, which were more in line, I'm sure, with the kind of things that Brady and I would be interested in watching. Yeah. So in documentaries, just it's a different narrative. Yeah. But you now have, you still have these amazing documentaries that get made every single year. And the short list for the documentaries came out today. There's an amazing group of films. Yeah. But by and large, to subsist as a documentary filmmaker, there was this really amazing heyday that more or less was over the course of the past decade, which coincided with the rise of the streamers, Netflix and Amazon and Apple, and all of a sudden you had all this money that existed, and so there was more content, more films, but then they became more the same. And then Netflix cornered a marketplace, and then they basically tell you exactly how they want their films to be for their audience,
including their delivery specs.
Including their delivery specs, but it's including thankfully this was a process I didn't have to go through with them, and I wouldn't have, but it was at minute 3, this is supposed to happen. At minute 10, this is supposed to happen. So what you have are a series, and so they are dictating the terms through which or by which these films get made. And by the way, what's an artist or a documentary filmmaker to do if you have to make a living? And so you still want to take a commission to make a film. Yeah. They still are the people that have the widest audience. But we are losing out because basically the films that people have access to when they turn on these services, they're watching crap. Basically, and they will acquire some films every once in a while for their award services. So, there's 3 films that they have on the short list. Cover Up, which is an amazing film about the investigative journalist Cy Hirsch, Apocalypse in the Tropics that Petra Costa made about Brazil, and Perfect Neighbor. These are 3 films. They were all independently made. Yeah. And then they bought them. Yeah. So they want the prestige when it serves them, but in terms of the movies that get made, so it's a really frustrating space to be in, where essentially these people that have the money control the process, and in essence, where we lose as an audience is that people sort of they stop distinguishing what's real or what's not, what's true or what's not, what's good or what's not, and so we all are, again, it's we're going to McDonald's. Sorry, I want to make a joke about McDowell's versus McDonald's. I like coming to America, but I like McDowell's, but anyway.
I don't think they want you to make that joke. So I'll impose the censorship from the board and from Chi here. Okay, so I'm going to ask my last question and turn it over to these cards. So this is maybe not lighthearted, but it's different. So you both also experiment not only within the genres that you are currently known for, but you're working on a documentary. And I watched the Ted Lasso. I've never watched the show, so I watched the episode that you directed. So I'm curious and it was very political. I don't know, the show may be political in general, but it was a very political and thoughtful episode. So just curious for you, are you more interested in doing narrative directing?
I've tried. I mean, I've tried in the last, since OJ, I've worked on a handful of films. The 2 films I'm working on in earnest are narrative films right now, and one that would be more in line with what I'm interested in topic-wise, and all the things we're talking about, hypocrisies, contradictions, American history.
Okay.
There's a film I want to make, and I actually believe the best form, or the only form of it, is in the narrative form. The problem is, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So it's very hard for me to actually, but I still believe this is, and on the other end, I'm really, I don't know, I'm sort of traumatized by the documentary form at the moment, certainly in the way that I've experienced it, so I'll keep trying.
Okay, thank you. And you're making a documentary?
Yeah, I've been contributing a piece which is sort of constantly evolving and changing about the Chinese visual artist Saiguo Chang, who also had another very, very different documentary made about him years ago called Skyladder. But this has been a collaboration with Wong Kar-wai, Jia Zonka, and a French Senegalese filmmaker named Madi Diop. We've each made. It's essentially each film is centered around a major performance of the artist. What's complicated, and as this relates to censorship, is that I shot a performance that was not permitted on 70 millimeter in Tibet, and now its inclusion in the larger piece could have a major impact on the careers of the Chinese producers and filmmakers. So I am now in the process of likely excising that and making that its own piece, because my worst case scenario is that I can't go back. And that's one thing. But if I was based there and my career was in China, it'd be a different story. So I really don't know. I mean, it's really uncertain. And the one thing about documentary is that that uncertainty is something that you kind of have signed up for. I mean, if it's a story, especially that doesn't have a third act. So I've been shooting it for the joy of shooting. But I'm making. I have a feeling that I'm going to end up continuing to shoot for a while longer to make something of this extraordinary footage we shot on 70 mil in Tibet, and then I'm working on a narrative film that I start in March.
So I have 2. I'm going to combine. I have notes that I should ask one question. I'm going to combine 2 questions. One is a little plug for MacDowell. What might you do with 6 weeks in a studio in New Hampshire? I think it's.
Are you guys offering?
Well, I'm like you.
Is that what I get? Is that what I get for doing this? Because I'm open to it.
Yeah, we're all open to it.
It sounds okay.
Do we have to share a house?
I don't think that's how it works. But you'll have dinner together. I think that's you have your own independent spaces, then you have dinner together.
A high school dropout at MacDowell.
So that's, and then I guess you could or could not answer the question, but the last question I want to end with, sounds like everyone wants to go to MacDowell, so that's exciting. How do you hope your work will continue to resonate in years to come? What legacy, if any, do you hope to leave in your wake? I don't know, it's like...
The finisher.
I would like to leave a positive legacy for all the children who get to watch my work.
Okay. My daughter and I were watching the OJ Made in America, my 13-year-old, so I told him that, and we should keep on.
So it's already working, right?
Yes, she was so befuddled by so much.
Then not so much.
No, it's great. It was good. She just didn't know all that. She didn't know who OJ was, so it's a lot there.
Do you think he's a good guy?
No, how could you?
Well, maybe she only got through the first part. I don't know.
No, we were near the end.
Oh.
Anyway, so
Wait,
for the children.
Is he guilty?
She 100%.
100%.
She just didn't okay, let's not get into this. I told you she didn't understand why people could think he's guilty, and the complexity that you're trying to answer or at least address in the film. No, she's. We can talk more about this, but I think the emergence of Obama creates a different narrative as an African American figure of success than someone like OJ. Yeah, and so there's more possibilities actually. So that's what I thought of. But okay, in your wake so you want the children of tomorrow or today?
In your wake,
the children of today and tomorrow to
my biography. in my wake. I don't know. I mean, that's
What do you want your children to think of your legacy?
I want her to, be patient and radical and free. I'd like my daughter to inherit a better, world than I did. I mean, I'm speaking in generalities and platitudes, but it's all true. I think that right now I'm mostly focused on just, keeping a roof over her head and also, doing so in a fashion that doesn't, embarrass her at dinner parties. Like, oh, Dad kept a roof over my head, and he did everything that he wanted to do while he was doing it, as opposed to, he kept a roof over my head, but it's. That's a longer story. So I'd like to make her proud of us, and I think that I just want to create a more sustainable ecosystem, not just for myself, but for other filmmakers as well. In my lifetime, I'll maybe make 7 to 10 narrative features in my life, and that would be amazing. I don't think I'm selling myself short. I actually think that's realistic because these projects take a long time. And so I'd like to see some other people get their films made because I want more great stuff to watch. I'm first and foremost a film viewer, and I'm not thrilled about the state of things this year or in the last 15 to 20-ish.
Yeah, I mean, earnestly, I would say that if people sort of, because I do think documentaries and journalism in general, like it sort of increasingly feels like, these things are endangered species in terms of how they're a buddy that gets put towards them and how they get absorbed. And I think that if there's people who can look at my work and sort of understand that there's a way to make long-form narrative nonfiction and do it in a way that's educational and entertainment, and like understand that it's important to understand history and context of, the events that take place in this country and beyond. I mean, that's what I would like, because I don't want this to be a dying art form. And I feel like the way that we prioritize what gets made, how it gets made, why it gets made, that's sometimes how it feels. And it's very different for me now in terms of how I feel about what gets made than 20 years ago in this form. And I would feel the same way about narrative film, and I'm not someone who has made them. But I'm also an avid consumer of films, and I have the same issue in terms of what gets made and sort of how I react to them. And I just feel like there still has to be an audience, but I am worried about this younger generation that, like, we grew up and we absorbed things that made us and inspired us to want to make what we make. And if the quality of the films and the quality of the output is going down, like, I don't know what that means for a next generation, or certainly younger generations. And so in that way, if we can serve as any model, that if someone can watch the stuff and go, oh, there's a way to make things that are more challenging and that are deeper and that are more comprehensive and complex and nuanced, then great.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Salamishah. Thank you, Ezra, and thank you, Brady. I don't know about you, but I think tonight felt very MacDowell to me. I felt as though I was at a dinner table talking to artists in a quiet room, and that's our goal. So thank you. This was really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for moderating.
Very quick note. I know we didn't get through many questions, but we do have a reception. There's wine, there's dessert, there's burger sliders. I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat one. So hang around for a little bit, and hopefully our guests will hang around for a little bit too and answer some questions.
Thank you.
Oh, you did? Yeah, okay, I was wondering about the cards.
Yeah, 'cause